Did you want to?
Yeah, so welcome to today's session. Today is going to be about AWS and Google alliances, and specifically how we can partner with these two business units and ultimately drive more value for our customers and have more engaging conversations, right? So the ultimate goal of this class is to get more sales accepted opportunities by using the AWS and Google talk track. So exactly what things that we'll cover is how to identify an opportunity, what questions to ask, and basically that tailorized conversation so that it can be more specific to what someone who may be a cloud architect or a cloud engineer is actually trying to do. So the specific things that we're going to try to do to get to this point is we'll take a step back and have a brief understanding of what alliances and channel is. For many of you that may at some point want to consider a career in alliances or channel, we'll talk about exactly what these business units actually function within our company. After that, we'll take a little bit of a detour to just sort of summarize the public cloud. Why are people migrating to the public cloud? How much money is in it? How can we hook into some of these opportunities? And then the last thing is ultimately talking about that conversation that we can have with customers. So as opposed to why GitLab, if someone is moving into cloud, why GitLab for your cloud migration? How can we add value to what you're trying to do? And hopefully, if that is someone that is in that stage, now they may be more interested in what we have to offer. So that's what we're talking about today. We only have 3 people here in today's session, so feel free to interject or ask questions at any time. So what are alliances? If you asked me a couple of years ago, I would have said, well, it's probably like this, right? What is channel? I know a lot of senior directors, VPs, they still don't really understand the difference between all the different channel types. There's maybe around 6 to 7 different types of channel. And to be quite honest, it's really confusing. But at a high level, and not trying to get this too complicated, let's just start with channel first. So basically what channel partners is its resellers, right? So if you're Under Armour, you sell direct, but you also allow Kohl's and the Nike, not Nike store, but Walmart, other vendors to sell your stuff. And when other vendors are selling your products, they get a cut of the profit. And so the reason why a business wants to start investing into the channel is so that now all of a sudden we've greatly scaled out our sales team. It's not just our sales team that's doing stuff, it is other vendors that are selling our things as well, expanding our reach, expanding the number of customers that we're engaging with, and ultimately increasing more visibility for our product. I worked for a company, Red Hat, which has got acquired for over $30 billion. And one of their primary sales strategies was through the channel. So they got a huge amount of their revenue through channel partners. And so that's why GitLab right now is trying to invest in a channel. So how can we get other distributors to sell GitLab for us? That's what we're trying to do. Now contrast that with business alliances. There's obviously a formal definition, but at a high level, what we're really talking about is 2 companies that are jointly working together to either create products that synergize together or to create a sales motion that synergizes together. So let's just talk about some examples. Airlines is a great example, right? If you want to get up and running in an airline, you have to invest a ton into renting out airports, into infrastructure, refueling stations, and ultimately that's really, really, really expensive for a smaller player to get up and running. So what they do instead is they form this gigantic alliance, right? So maybe Southwest owns the refueling station in this airport, and maybe the smaller regional airlines, they can just have an alliance with Southwest so that they can use the refueling station. There are 3 airline alliances that cover 60% of the entire planet. And as you can see in this chart down right, this is the Star Alliance, SkyTeam, and One World. And so this is an example of a generic business alliance. Another example, how many of y'all have been to a coffee shop in Barnes & Nobles before? Maybe studied there, maybe hung out there, met a friend. Yeah, exactly. So here's an example of 2 businesses that are winning together. And the whole idea is Barnes& and Noble's wins because now there's a place in their store that they didn't have to build, they don't have to maintain, um, and they win because people can now they get more book sales. Starbucks wins because all these people are now just like getting their coffee while they're reading these books. And then the last example that I have is Spotify and Uber. This is something they rolled out recently, but you can now use Spotify to control the music if you're driving around in Uber. So it's just another example. So these two companies had to basically come together, come to a business agreement, and then they actually had to build in the functionality into their app so that it could actually be executed from an implementation point of view. So now that we have a little bit of an understanding about alliances, now let's start talking about what is the alliance strategy between AWS and Google and GitLab. So what we're really talking about here is primarily two things. I met basically 5 to 10 times with our directors of alliances here, and this is what they told me. They told me that really we can have very complicated alliances, but it only comes down to two main things. One, we're trying to come up with a better experience for our customers to use both of these clouds and GitLab. And ultimately, there's also a sales and marketing part as well. One of the things that we're rolling out is that there's actually going to be dedicated Google salespeople that are going to be helping for joint sales motions with GitLab and Google. So they are investing marketing and sales dollars and creating a funnel that's supposed to jointly help out each other's business. So do y'all need me to review public, private, hybrid cloud, or do we feel like we have a good gauge on these three?
Can you review that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the beginning, people had servers. The servers were on-prem. You basically, if your business was growing, you'd buy another rack. And then if your business kept on growing, you'd buy another rack. Everything was in your local data center. And the new paradigm that we've been seeing in the last really 5 to 7 years is the shift from businesses owning all of their own data centers to renting out these public cloud data centers. And so the idea is, as opposed to me owning and operating all my infrastructure, as a business, I can now use Google's infrastructure and pay them money for their infrastructure. So infrastructure as a service, basically. So where's the industry moving right now? As you all exactly said, people are mentioning all the time that they're moving to the cloud, right? I think that right now, probably around 70 to 80% of businesses are in some like place in moving to the cloud. It's something that every C-level, a lot of VPs are interested in. So where the industry is moving is to what we call hybrid cloud environments with multi-cloud deployments. We'll explain what both of these things mean. But what we mean by a hybrid cloud environment is that they'll have some workloads in Azure, Google, for instance, but you still have to have some stuff on-prem because some applications, just because of how they were written, they need to run on-prem. Or you may have some sort of security constraint, right? So let's just say that because of your security rules, you have to have this data being stored on-prem. So that's why we're talking about a hybrid cloud environment. We're talking about some mix of both on-prem and in the public cloud. The second part of this is multi-cloud deployments. Can anyone guess why someone would want to have workloads in multiple public cloud vendors?
For like security and availability, like if something happens to one, you have the other one to fall back on.
That's good. From a business perspective, is it a good idea to have, well, I'll put it this way. So generally speaking, if I'm a business and I have almost all of my infrastructure and all my tooling that's built for Azure, and then Microsoft's strategy in their business direction goes down south, then all of a sudden I have to spend 2 years to go re-architect and move everything over. So it's also safer for me to have a footprint in generally 2 public clouds. Generally what we're seeing is that, especially in the enterprise space, people go after maybe like 2 public clouds. And then so maybe out of my public cloud footprint, 60% will be in AWS and 40% will be in Microsoft Azure. And then that also helps them avoid what they call vendor lock-in, right? And then so a lot of people, they basically, it's no secret that like Amazon, they want to charge really, really small prices and then push out a lot of the competition. And then given a long enough period of time after they've crushed their competition, they can just like surge prices if they want to, right? So if you have a footprint in both, then you prevent yourself where you're all locked into one vendor for everything. So that being said, many workloads are being migrated to the public cloud. It's basically what all of our customers are doing right now. And many applications are running with what we call autoscale. We'll talk about what that means. And we're talking about big money. So these moves are accelerating. Okay, so have you all seen EC2 before?
I haven't seen, I think in our earlier classes, you've briefly showed Amazon EC2, how you can just like easily access that deployment
Okay,
with EC2.
awesome. So let me just do a quick review on how basically this works. So let's just say that it's maybe like 10 years ago. If I want new servers, I need to go have this like capital expenditure cost. It goes through procurement. I buy $40,000 of new servers. They finally come in a month later. I get my engineers to rack them. I connect a bunch of wires to them, install my app on them. And then finally, like 3 months later, like they're ready to basically be put into production. But in a public cloud environment, you can do everything through the website. So let's just say I want a VM. Over here, it's going to ask me what type of VM. So let's just say I want Red Hat Linux. It's going to ask me what type of hardware that you want. So if you have a big data workload, then you can have one with high CPUs. If it's going to be like a big database, you can have one with more memory. If it's something that's very graphic intensive, you can get things with like a lot of GPUs, right? So let's just go with, and notice that there's different prices for all of these too. So it doesn't actually show it in this chart, but one of these will be like 8 cents per hour. One of these will be 12 cents per hour. But generally speaking, VM and EC2 will be something between 8 and 50 cents per hour. So let's just go over here, configuration details. So same business case, right? Let's just say I want 200 servers. And if I went to the review and launch button over here and I hit this launch button, then within 3 minutes, I would have 200 new servers that I could play around with. I'm not going to do that because this isn't my account, but it's just an example of how the paradigm of computing changed. So we went from a capital, very long sales cycle, very long implementation cycle, and a capital expenditure to all of a sudden an operating expense. And so part of the reason why the public cloud is selling so much is because it used to be before some VP or C level would have to sign off on like some 6-figure deal to expand your data center. Now, it brought the power to the individual like practitioner level. Any sort of engineer can now go launch an instance, get a VM within a couple of minutes. So that's basically another reason why the public cloud adoption has been as high as it has. So let's just talk about auto-scaling applications. This is something that does matter, and a lot of our customers are trying to implement this right now. So the whole idea is, have you ever, do any of you have Jordan brand shoes? Okay, no one's a sneakerhead. Yeah, so Nike has these things called flash sales. A Jordan is typically like $300 to $400, and then they have these things called flash sales, where it's like for first come, first serve at our website. If you log in, you can get a Jordan brand for like 60, 70% off until supplies run out, right? And they'll generally only have supplies for like 2 hours. And the whole idea is to create market hysteria, right? And then so let's just say on the y-axis is number of servers that you need in your environment. And then this is time on the bottom. So this is noon, this is midnight. So basically, this is web traffic that's needed for Nike's website. Well, at noon, people are checking, basically buying stuff because we're bored at work. Everyone goes back to work. And then around 7 p.m., boom, there's like this absolutely absurd surge in traffic. They run out of supplies. And then it just starts creeping down as people realize that there's like no Jordans that they can get anymore because supplies are exhausted. So what a lot of C-level and VPs, the reason why they really care about the public cloud is because if they were doing everything on-prem, you have to have compute for the highest level. And a lot of times it's hard to predict how high this highest level is going to be, right? So the whole idea with the flash sale is to create market hysteria and basically just people like impulse buying. So you don't know how viral it's going to go, right? So it's hard to know how many people are going to actually go be part of your flash sale. But even if you did, think about all this wasted capacity, right? So if this were purely on-prem, then basically almost all of this area is server sitting idle. It's only for our peak workload that we actually need our server capacity for. And then so what these VPs and these C levels are trying to do is they leverage the public cloud as basically an infinite, inexhaustible pool of resources where they actually can create an application that's smart enough where enough people are logging into their website and basically the app is smart enough to create more compute and more servers in the public cloud and to add it into like behind their load balancer automatically. And then so your applications are now just scaling up on their own. Once the flash sale is over, they scale back down on their own. And the public cloud allows you to actually design applications that are like this. The fact that public cloud allows you to basically just scale up and down in a seamless manner like this is one of the primary drivers for why people are moving to the public cloud. It makes people's jobs way easier. If you're a VP of infrastructure, if you know that you have auto scaling, you don't have to worry about like performance bottlenecks anymore because the public cloud basically took care of one of the main things that you're responsible for in your role for you, right? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the market now. It's a big and expanding market. It's also a competitive market, so you can think of it like utilities with added services. Generally speaking, if Azure drops their prices, then AWS and Google will follow in the next couple of months, right? Because it's just almost like, imagine if you have two wireless internet providers or like cable internet providers, and like if Spectrum is offering like 20% off or something. So it's pretty competitive. It's not purely like utilities. The services do matter a lot. And the big three are AWS, Azure, and GCP. What we're really trying to do over here is we talk about enterprise agreements with Microsoft a lot. And so as a review, what Microsoft is doing is here's a $30 million deal. It's a 5-year deal. We'll throw in GitHub for free. And then all of a sudden we're locked out of the account. So what our partnership team is really trying to do right now is to basically talk to Amazon and Google and say, hey, this is hurting you as well as it's hurting us. Why not include GitLab with some of the deals that you have? And now we can lock your customers, these customers, out of GitHub instead. So we're basically trying to leverage a partnership and create a partnership with these other big cloud vendors so that we can actually have a similar motion to what Microsoft is doing with GitHub. That's still in the works. Mayank and Pete Goldberg are working on this, but that's the end goal if we can create a situation like this. Over here, you can see public cloud revenue. So IT in general is pretty flat. IT spend in general is pretty flat. But as you can see, the public cloud is growing around 20-30% year over year. So out of this one segment in IT, however, is growing astronomically, like quickly. So it's a really hot place to be. I know salespeople on the AWS side, and their like quotas are basically like increase 100% year over year, but they usually hit it too. And we're talking about ultimately big money, right? So there was one deal that happened last year that was worth $15 billion. And it was the Department of Defense awarding it to Microsoft, actually. And talking with my friend who's on the line side who used to be on the line side at AWS, he told me that like watching these deals come in, we're not talking about like $1, $2, $3 million deals. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars every once in a while. Like their Windwire, a big deal for them would be like in the $1 billion range. That was a big deal for them. And there'd be a couple of them that would come in like every week, basically. And all of this is accelerating as well. So we're talking about huge amounts of money, right? We're talking about $15 billion in one deal. So ultimately, that was all great abstract knowledge. But ultimately, why does this matter for us? And how do we use this to our advantage now that we have a little bit more of an understanding of what's happening in general? So the whole point is that companies have huge budgets for cloud. They may not have budget for infrastructure in general, but they may have a cloud budget. As a cloud tool, we can get a cut of this, right? So what I mean by this is that if the Pentagon basically allocates $15 billion in this cloud like rollout, then a couple percent of that is going to be for tooling, right? Because it's not just about the cloud, it's about the tooling for the cloud. It's about scaling it up, scaling it down so that they can maximize and utilize basically their gigantic purchase that they've made, right? And then so what we're trying to do is we're trying to get a cut of this cloud spend. They may, once again, they may not have a budget for infrastructure, but if they have cloud initiatives, then all of a sudden there's budget and we can get part of this. And ultimately we're talking about is also big budget, right? We're talking about like even 1 to 5% of $15 billion as a cut for tooling. We're talking about something like that. So ultimately for these cloud spends, GitLab would literally be like a one single line item in their cloud like migration strategy budget. Like it would just be like one line item. That being said, we can add a lot of value to these migrations and what they're trying to do. Other things about this is that business units that are adopting the cloud, migrating things to the cloud, are the ones most likely looking for new tooling, right? Because they're trying to do something new. They're still trying to figure out. It's basically like if we talk to a stagnant business unit that's been doing the exact same thing for the last 5 years, it's pretty hard to break in and add value. But if people are trying the new thing, they're migrating to the cloud, they're looking for direction, then we can actually help them. We can add value to what they're trying to do, create a streamlined experience, and ultimately get part of that budget. So now that we talked about from a sales incentive what we're talking about, let's actually talk about from a product perspective what we bring to the table. So we should be pretty familiar with this chart, right? This is what GitLab does. Developers create issues, then they write code, ultimately creating a merge request, then our CI runs, and eventually what happens is that the CD pipeline runs. And so does anyone recognize any of these icons on the right?
Kubernetes.
Yeah, I can't go down the list and name them.
Kubernetes.
Yeah,
Atlassian.
Kubernetes. Yeah. So what we're talking about here is deploying to different targets, right? The end result of all of this is updating your servers or creating new servers. When you are making a change and I create my merge request, ultimately after the merge request is accepted, there is zero business value. 0% of our customers are impacted. It is not until new servers are deployed with that new merge request that any business value comes out of what our engineers were working on. So the story does not end with the merge request approval and merge. The story ends when applications and new changes are put into production, ultimately driving more value for whatever end stakeholders people are using GitLab for. So in other words, basically, we're talking about companies investing 50 million, 100 million, 200 million in their engineering. They do not care about, they care ultimately that their apps are the greatest. So this last stage over here, deploying into production, is needed so that customers can actually see the changes and experience that new functionality that their developers have been working on. So this last stage, deploying into production, that's what we're talking about. These 6 icons here, they are all specific AWS cloud targets. So the reason why I mentioned this is that like we talk about AWS cloud. AWS cloud actually offers many, many different services. So the first one's called Lambda. The fourth one's called EKS. But each of these icons actually corresponds with a specific type of workload. So what we're talking about over here, actually, I'll get to that later. But what we're talking about here is deploying to GitLab, right? So after a GitLab merge request is accepted, GitLab, what it can do, and our ultimate value offering is we have automated deployments to the public cloud, right? And then so this saves businesses time, money, allows people to implement best practices such as continuous delivery or continuous deployment. And so that now these customers can maximize their cloud bet, right? So if you just think about it over here, so scrolling back, the Pentagon made a $15 billion bet with Microsoft Cloud. If they can improve the efficiency and their utilization of that 2, 3, 5%, the business value that they get out of that is like 5% of 15 billion. It's astronomical, right? And so the ability to have an automated deployment strategy all the way from creating a merge request to updating our servers allows people to maximize this cloud bet. Otherwise, what you have to do is you have to log into your instance. Let's just say that I'm doing everything manually, right? I have my workload running in the cloud. I need to update my servers by hand. So what I do is, let's just type in all of these like Ansible core servers. I need to update them. So let's just say that this is running version 3.2 of my app. So now I have to find out how many servers this is. Okay, it's 32 servers, right? I got to write down, actually it's 52 servers. I got to write that number down, remember it. Then what I do is I launch instances, and then I have to create 52 servers, right? That all takes me a bunch of time. Then I install my application on all the 52 servers for the newer version, including the changes in my merge request, right? And then after all of those servers are spun up, I verified that they're good, everything like that. Now I kill those servers that are running the older version, and I switch over network traffic to basically so that when someone goes to like Amazon.com or something, it would point to my new servers. So without some sort of automated, streamlined way of doing this, one, it's prone to error. Two, it takes a lot of time. Three, even if I forgot about any of that stuff, then people can't visit my website, right? So it's a really, really manual process without some sort of automated deployment solution. So what we bring to the table is the ability, just like how CI runs in an automated fashion, we can have CD run in an automated fashion to all of these cloud targets. That's what we're talking about today. The other thing to really talk about with this is that we deploy to all clouds. So this is really important because most of our customers, especially those in the enterprise space, if these businesses get larger, they have a multi-cloud strategy, right? They want to avoid that vendor lock-in. And so the fact that we play nicely, if you're AWS, great. If you're Google, great. If you're Microsoft, great. Even something weird where it's like Alibaba and Oracle Cloud. Do you want to go put your workloads on that? That's great too. So we deploy to all cloud targets. And within each of these cloud targets, AWS Lambda, AWS EKS, the AWS's container service, we can deploy to all those as well. And ultimately, what we're talking about over here is all the stuff in the release and configure section. So implementing things like serverless and advanced deployments and continuous delivery. That's what we're talking about here. So ultimately, from a business perspective, you finally get a call, you're talking to someone, they're talking about cloud migration. What are the things to say, right? So for someone getting in the cloud, it's a really hard thing for people to do, right? So if you just think about it, our engineers have, for the last 25 years, done everything on-prem. They're exploring the cloud. All of their peers are doing it. It seems really complicated. There's maybe 7 AWS certificates so that you can get like certified, right? Like, and so what we're talking about is lowering the barrier of entry for cloud adoption with GitLab. That is one of the things that we bring to the table. Other things that we bring to the table is with continuous integration continuous deployment that's automated. We're talking about more efficiently utilizing cloud spend by using GitLab to do your automated deploys. And so what does that bring to the table? Well, the difference is some sort of service that's redeploying everything in an automated fashion to people going in and then unclicking servers, going to kill these servers. So like instance state, terminate instance, creating new servers, doing it in an automated fashion. Ultimately not scalable. If you were a business that's trying to do this, then you basically can never be like super competitive in this space. You need some sort of continuous deployment service at this point. And then all of this matters is because clouds, we already talked about this, cloud spend for enterprise companies is easily within the $100 million to $1 billion range. Once again, what this means for us is that part of this budget is for tooling, right? And so GitLab can get part of this budget. They need to spend this money. It's already earmarked for next year. And then the other thing is that if we can allow these people to, let's just say, improve efficiency and business outcome with this bet 10, 15, 20%, the business value is like, 10, 20, 30% more of 100 million to 1 billion. So it's a lot of basically just maximizing that bet. These VPs, these C-levels, they've made a multi-year commitment for a public cloud vendor. So how can you make sure that like they really, that was one of the maybe like 3 strategic bets that they're making, right? So how can they make sure that that's as successful as possible? We already demoed before and after with GitLab. So now it's talking about deploying to what. So things that you may have heard is like EKS, GCR, all this other stuff. The whole idea with this, summarizing this chart, is that whatever deployment target a customer is trying to do. So if they say, hey, do you deploy to EKS? The answer is yes. If they're saying, do you deploy to GCE? The answer is yes, because we support all of them. And so we understand virtual machines, containers, and Kubernetes. It's just different types of virtualization. The only thing that I think may be new for y'all is function as a service or serverless. How often does that come up in y'all's conversations?
Fast is a new one for me.
Okay. Let me just go over it real briefly, because I do think that at least some of the marketing material that we send out, I've seen it come up from time to time. So typically speaking, if a customer wants, let's just say a website, or they're doing some big data analysis or something, what they'll do is they'll go into some cloud service, get a bunch of servers, install their app on it, run their job, right? And then when they're done, then they maybe get rid of the servers, right? So what function as a service or serverless is doing is they're basically saying, from a business perspective, you really don't care about the servers. You really just care about having some sort of big data set analyzed or some other like business function performed. So here's a great example. Let's just say that the 4 of us run a photography company, and we have to basically now like take photographs of some huge event. We're going to take 50,000 photographs, and then after it, we need to resize all of them and put them on our website, right? And then so the batch job that we're actually trying to do is resizing 50,000 photographs. So what we do is that we can actually just define the function, which is a resizing function, upload all the photographs for the function, and then this service is smart enough to create all the servers behind the scenes that I need to do this job. And then once the job's done, it kills all my servers for me. The difference is that I never actually see the underlying infrastructure. I just am paying for the job itself. So Amazon still charges me for the infrastructure that was needed to do the job, but I don't really manage it. I don't really even care about the servers. I just want it to scale out and then scale back in and ultimately have my photos resized. That's why it's called serverless. It's for people who just want a business outcome. So photographs resized, big data set analyzed, and they want this done. they don't really care and they don't want to manage all the underlying infrastructure. All they want is for their function to be done as a service. That's it. And these fast offerings basically make it easier so that for someone to do something like this. Every cloud vendor has fast. Microsoft, AWS, Google, maybe some of the minor ones, they don't have it. But this is something that GitLab actually does. If you take a look at our maturity sheet, it's something that we actually list as our serverless offering. Okay, so we got to talk a little bit more about the specific things that we've built out here. So we have an alliances team, the people on our right. This is Pete Goldberg. He's the director of alliances for AWS. This is Mayank. He's our newly promoted director for Google. And so what these two guys are working on is basically figuring out how can we leverage our relationship with these public clouds so that we can have almost an alternative to what Microsoft is doing with EA agreements, right? So their ultimate vision is, one, trying to build out the alliance, trying to come up with a better go-to-market strategy. But ultimately, if they can get like something where Google is now throwing in GitLab as part of their cloud deals, then that's their end goal, right? So obviously that's something that's going to take a long time to basically get vetted out, but it's a good productive step that the fact that Google was willing to, they've actually bet several $1 million in marketing funds for GitLab of their own money, and also dedicating some of their salespeople to work on selling GitLab full time. So one of the things that they built out, this is very rudimentary, like one of the things that they probably did within the first couple of months of getting here is to get GitLab in the cloud marketplace. So what I mean by this is that every cloud vendor has what they call a marketplace. The marketplace is this place where you can just buy apps. So if you want a VM with GitLab Community Edition, you just click here. If you want GitLab Premium, you click here. Let's just say you want a trial. If you want a trial, you just click here. And so the reason why this is good is because let's just say that I wanted a GitLab trial. If I didn't have this, then I'd have to go into my data center, get a VM, set up the networking for it, and then install GitLab on it. That takes me maybe 3 days, right? But if I want to get this through the public cloud, this just takes me 3 minutes. And so it has reduced the amount of friction and work involved for getting a GitLab trial up and running, ultimately creating an easier experience for our customers. So in AWS's marketplace, you can get GitLab. And like for Google's marketplace, you can get GitLab, same thing with Azure Marketplace. And we're going to get rid of the Community Edition pretty soon. So it's only going to be the paid tiers that are in GitLab.
So is that paying for, the cloud and GitLab licenses as you purchase that way?
Yeah, so you have to pay for the infrastructure and you have to pay for the software. So it's basically, it's going to be an additive fee, and AWS will get part of the cut, basically.
Okay.
Thanks for asking. All right, so now let's talk about relevant personas. Obviously, higher up is better. These are the people who are making these multi-year cloud bets in the first place. And so getting a conversation with them and asking questions like, how do you plan on maximizing this cloud bet? Are you having trouble implementing cloud? What are some of the bottlenecks that you're seeing? Do you have a continuous deployment strategy, right? Are you happy with your amount of business value that you've gotten out of the cloud so far, right? And so that's important because these are the people who ultimately their KPI is going to be involved with one of the things that they're responsible for is cloud rollout, right? From a technical perspective, what we're talking about is cloud architects, cloud engineers. If we go on LinkedIn, if we see people with AWS certificates, if in their job description they say, I implemented our migrating this thing to AWS, so on and so forth. Other things are DevOps leads. The reason why is because DevOps today, the vast majority of those people are actually using the cloud too. So sometimes they may not have dedicated cloud engineers, but guaranteed a lot of the time that the DevOps people are actually deploying to the cloud, know about it. A lot of them are in charge of some cloud strategy, especially in the SMB space. And so from a LinkedIn perspective, what we're talking about here is you type in something like this, find relevant personas, right? And then just scrolling through here, trying to find out all the information. Okay, so it's AWS, great. So now I have that information going in and so on and so forth. All right, so ultimately now bringing everything to what's the meat of this conversation. So let's talk about just questions to ask. So a really great question to ask and open up after, maybe an AWS event, a Google event is, what is your cloud strategy, right? A lot of times people will say, we're getting started in the cloud, we're migrating to the cloud. And then so if they answer in this manner, you can follow up with, would you be interested in hearing ways to lower the barrier of entry in the cloud, right? Because a lot of these practitioners, they're stressed out about how to do this. This is a large undertaking. It's not easy to migrate things over to the cloud. And so having ways to lower the barrier to entry and to make this more seamless, that's a huge business win. If they're more advanced in their implementation, have a multi-cloud strategy already implemented, maybe in the enterprise space, then you can ask something like, would you be interested in hearing about how to adopt vendor agnostic cloud practices, right? Once again, these enterprises, part of their strategic roadmap is to prevent vendor lock-in. What people don't want is that they're completely dependent on Amazon, and if Amazon's roadmap goes haywire or something like that, then they might have to spend 3 years re-architecting, moving things over, retooling, and training our engineers on maybe Azure's tools, right? So we always want to be in the enterprise space, at least on 2 public clouds. So the great thing about this is that GitLab is natively vendor agnostic. We don't care if you're using AWS or Google or Microsoft. We deploy to all of them. So it is one tool, and the business value out of this is that typically there's one tool for deploying to Microsoft, there's one tool for deploying to Google. To have one tool that deploys to all 3 of them is a huge win, because now you can basically consolidate your tool stack, right? And from a training perspective, now I don't need to have engineers when I'm hiring that are doing this. I need to go hire for engineers that learn the Google version and then also learn the Microsoft version. I can use the universal tool. Another thing is also using social proof, right? So would you be interested in hearing about how some of your peer organizations have switched to GitLab for cloud deployments and realized return on investment, right? So we have a lot of case studies. And you can take a look at some of them. Axway is one of them, but for both the Google side and the Amazon side, we have really great case studies that we can show out. If you just look in the handbook, there's a good number of them that we can reference. So ultimately putting it all together, right? We talked about a lot of things today. What's like the 30-second summary of what we mentioned today in the final call to action? So just resetting context, majority of businesses are migrating to the cloud. And how we hook into this is that we can accelerate your journey. This is a hard road. This is something that's difficult. This is something that you've invested $300 million into. We know that you care about that. What are some of the problems that you're having? Is automated deploys one of them? Is basically training of new tools one of them? Well, we can help, right? That's what we're talking about here. And the fact that GitLab can allow these people to maximize that $300 million bet. We know, once again, we know that you care about it. Let's talk about how to make this the most successful project implementation possible. How do we do this? We do this by serving as a complete DevOps platform, all the way from ideation to deployment. And so it's the basic value drivers for GitLab itself. It's one tool for the entire DevOps lifecycle. And specifically, the area that they care about is automated deploys to the cloud. Specific calls to action. So when you're prospecting accounts, if you see a cloud architect, if you see a bunch of EC2 certificates, then start thinking, maybe it's a cloud practitioner, maybe as opposed to the general talk track, let's start talking about some of these questions that we listed today and then tailoring our messaging to include the better together story. So that's today's presentation. Evan, I got you out 10 minutes early. If you want credit for this class, fill out the Google Doc, and I'll stick around for the next 5 minutes to see if I can help clarify anything. Otherwise, feel free to hop off. Thanks for y'all for coming today.